Welcome to the Data Standard. My name is Matthew Rawl. I'm a guest host from Pandio, and I'm very excited today to welcome Thomas Fletcher. Tom, welcome to the show. Thank you for spending some time with the Data Standard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we kind of dive in, just as a kind of a reminder, so the Data Standard, we're a community focused on data science. We cater to data enthusiasts, so engineers, architects, scientists, kind of across the gamut. And today I'm really excited because I think Tom brings kind of a unique perspective because he's kind of been both on the organizational side and on the data science side. So if you don't mind, just for the listeners, Tom, can you kind of give a little bit of a background on your career kind of to date?
Sure. Out of college, I decided to, research was really my passion. And in particular, research about people, how we make decisions and whatnot. So somehow that led me into an academic path. I went to graduate school in industrial organizational psychology, where I found my second passion, and that was leveraging statistics. And after graduate school, I went to academia, was a professor teaching courses in multivariate statistics, as well as organizational psychology, motivation, things like that. But somewhere along the way, I accidentally stumbled into a path of insurance. One of the larger property and casualty carriers in the U.S. was growing their research department, and I came out of academia to focus research inside a single organization, which was interesting. Fully leveraging my background in psychology as well as statistics there, but as all things happen, you grow up and you move along in your career, and so I moved to another organization where doing largely the same thing, managing a team of data scientists, working with people in the data community, working with people in the different aspects of insurance, but it was in a different domain of insurance, and really excited for the time that I spent there. Really broadened, instead of focusing exclusively on people issues and behavioral science, but applying that, but also to operational issues, underwriting and the like. And then fast forward a few more years, actually 6 from there, then I decided that I wanted to expand yet again. And so now I'm in an area of insurance called reinsurance, and it's the organizations that insure the insurance companies, if you will. And that gives me an opportunity to not be focused inside a single company, but back to having a across the industry perspective. And so today I lead an analytics organization within PartnerRe. I have a team of data scientists, actuaries, statisticians, and so forth. We have a global focus, but I'm situated in the U.S. My team is largely in Toronto, and we work on all manner of problems across the customer journey within insurance.
Okay, so super interesting background. I'm curious, to hear kind of your perspective on how your background in kind of behavioral science and kind of studying organizations, how has that kind of helped you when you put on kind of your data science hat? What unique perspective, or, as opposed to probably the majority of the folks that you're working with or that are working for you are more classically trained, have spent most of their time in statistics, computer science type of workloads. I mean, what kind of advantages has that given you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a few things I can bring to bear here. One is I tend to focus on what's the business problem that we're trying to solve, not what's the solution that we have some data that we're trying to peddle, if you will. Mm-hmm. So starting with a business problem, and everyone could say that, you don't have to be a behavioral scientist to think about that. But also with that, now that I understand what the business problem is, I start to disentangle what are the sources of resistance that we're going to encounter? What's the disruption that the model might bring if we put together a model to solve that problem? What are the consequences of implementing the model and where would the model be most effective if implemented, right? So things that come to mind is models are most effective when they are closest to the point of decision making, not some abstract area. Models are least effective when you build the model and you stick it in a drawer and there's no change management strategy around the model usage and so forth. There's no communication around it. And finally, what is the workflow impact, right? Who are the people that are going to use the model, or how will that model impact their decision making? And are they comfortable, resistant in any kind of a way that you need to be mindful of? And you'd be surprised how many times you have a very elegantly built predictive model and the users are just uncomfortable and the project doesn't go forward, right? So that's it's one of those primary things that you need to think about. I've equally seen, good communication, good collaboration, and what I would call an okay model, a mediocre model, really get fully implemented and drive impact for the organization. So that was one of the big epiphanies for me early in my career. Is it wasn't always that the best model wins, although certainly terrible models are least effective. But you can have a great model and a poor change management plan and therefore have zero impact. You can have an okay model and a great change management plan and you can have some impact. And I think my thinking around that comes from my behavioral science background.
Mm-hmm. So digging into that a little bit more, I mean, do you feel like there should be someone in the organization that takes on that kind of change management role, like a chief data officer, or does there need to be somebody designated that actually plays that kind of intermediary between the business and the data science group? Or how do you, because you've seen some that have been successful, some rollouts haven't been successful. So what's kind of the magic sauce, or what are the key ingredients that make it change management really be effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think someone should serve in that role, whether that's an official role or whether it's a carve out of individuals on the team that have that perspective. That's probably an open debate. I've seen organizations that create relationship managers that serve as a conduit in between business units and say the data scientists or the predictive modelers. I've seen predictive modelers who have elegant communication skills and they are themselves the best suited for talking with the business to understand what the needs are, what is it we're trying to solution. But you do have to have a translating capacity, right? Whether that's a single person in that role or whether it's the modeler themselves, someone has to go, what's this business problem? Let me translate that into a methodology that we can do the math on and then translate it back to the solution that the business understands and realize the implications and all of those things about change management that mm-hmm. I talked about.
Okay, got it. I'm curious to hear from you. Just over the last kind of 15 years, I mean, clearly the idea of data science and machine learning is kind of it's a hot topic, right? It's kind of, in some ways it's in the media, it's kind of been hyped up, but a lot of these things have been around for years, right? And a lot of these approaches and building models. Do you feel like inside of the organizations you've been in, is there more receptiveness to the type of work that you're doing? Are you able to, are you viewed in a more favorable light? Or, can you talk a little bit about kind of what changes you've seen kind of as your career has kind of evolved?
Certainly. Every organization is on a journey and they're at a different point of that continuum along that journey of where they are. But you're absolutely correct. And many of the methods that we use are not things that just all of a sudden emerged and, oh, wow, no one ever had data before today, or no one knew how to run a statistical regression model before today. These things, whether the organization staffed for that or whether they had consulting statisticians or whatnot, these things have been around. Sometimes you have an organization that is what I would call data aspiring. So all insurance companies could be described in this regard. They all have data, right? They have an insurance policy and they have some claim activities that happen on some of those insurance policies, and they're trying to analyze that to understand customer behaviors, to understand profitability, risk, you name it, right? But some organizations are data aspiring, where they say, hey, we aspire to use the data to its fullest. In some are data driven, and some are, data action oriented, and that, there's a little bit of a continuum there. And the methods that get used might vary based off of compute power and things that have come along in the most recent 5 or 10 years, if you will. But the basic process of understanding that there is a problem to be solved, there is data to help solve that problem, there are statistical methods that we apply. I don't know that they're particularly novel. And if you talk to people inside insurance companies, the moment you mention data, you've got sort of two groups. You've got this group of people who are either on the IT side or business intelligence side, where they're managing the data, managing reports and basic functions along those sides. And then you've got another group of people who are more finance oriented, that have to do the actual reporting about, the regulatory reporting in that regard, but also the actuaries who are trained to analyze the data in a particular way that conforms to the regulatory requirements of how we count the risk, if you will, right? How do we measure risk, and how do we assess that and whatnot? And as far as I know, actuaries have been around for a very long time. That doesn't mean that the actuaries are using the novel methods that you hear that are emerging, and big machine power that we can put at a problem or things like that. But in all insurance organizations, like I said, you have to have someone who's managing data, because they're inherently a data-driven organization. You have people, by the nature of the regulation, reporting on that data, counting the losses and so on and so forth. And you have to have people who are capable of assessing the risk and ascribing the rates to that risk. Those things have been around, as far as I know, as long as insurance companies have been. So.
Okay. So I'm curious on assessing the risk, right? Which really gets into kind of the data science piece. And you think about like the pandemic that we're still going through now, or you think about climate change that's happening all around us. I'd love to hear kind of from you, how are you thinking about those types of risks, which are very hard to, well, maybe you'll tell me they're not, I don't know, but like the pandemic, like how do you prepare for something like that? Or how do you prepare for some of the talk about what, the rise in temperature in the oceans is going to do to households living on the coast, in the next 20 years? Like, how do you think about things that it looks like historically we don't have a lot of data or precedent behind them?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question alone, right? So first off, it's what kind of risk are we assessing? Two, and the things that you ascribed, for example, with the pandemic, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of knowns, and things are continuing to unfold. And 10 years from now, we'll be smarter, albeit in the rearview mirror, than we are today. In some cases, you're making a wild guess. In some cases, you're making a pretty precise guess, and sometimes it's somewhere in between, right? And generally, I think where our methods come to help is that we can take that wild guess that's somewhere between plus or minus infinity and narrow that and say, well, we don't know exactly the precise whatever, right, that is, but we can at least give you some boundaries here and say this is less than a wild guess, more than a precise guess. And that's really where I think the data science and the models come to play, is to help us narrow that uncertainty down to something that's manageable, right? So that the businesses can make their decisions and move along. With the pandemic, one of the things that surprised me is just underappreciating the impact beyond. We think about, the pandemic is related to lives lost, because that's what the media is portraying, and certainly that's the case. But for a lot of things, we forget about the implications of the economy and, oh, wait a minute, right? We didn't anticipate that governments would begin to shut down or large events would be canceled and so on and so forth. So that risk alone, grew and hit the world in many, many ways that were probably predictable, but, unfolded differently depending on what lens we're looking at. And so when you think about event cancellations, that's probably pretty clear, right? The Olympics did not happen. Concerts no longer happen. Bars closed, right? Restaurants reduced the ability to go in and on and on. Lives were lost. And so you can start to begin to predict, how do we think this virus is going to flow around the world and more people lose their lives and whatnot. But then there's other aspects of it that I just don't think we're going to know enough about for a while yet to come. And when we think about disabilities, for example, so some people leave work for a short period of time, they come back to work, that's fine, but they were on a disability for that interim period. I think that's a little bit harder to figure out what was the impact and how do we prepare for that later, and what models do we do, because a lot of that data hasn't even come in yet, right? People have gone out on disability, maybe they have reduced lung capacity, maybe they, whatnot, but the data, this is just one of those things that will just continue to unfold, that it's too early to tell in a lot of respects. And then the question becomes, anything we learn 2, 3, 4 years hence in the rearview mirror, is it relevant? And I don't know the answer to that either, right? It's just, will there be another event like this one that we can draw on, or do we need people to think through, okay, we can learn from this, but we need to understand how to apply it in the near and long term?
Yep. Okay. So just want to step back a second, and I'd love to hear, we always like to ask kind of, when we're doing these discussions, 2 or 3 kind of the biggest challenges you see in data science, and it doesn't have to be specific to where you are today or the organization you're in, but more kind of holistically, is it compute power? Is it finding properly trained data scientists? What are the, if you had to think of 2 or 3 things that are constant struggle for you to be successful, managing a team of data scientists, what would those things be?
I don't know if I'll get the priority of the ordering of this, right? So I'm just going to think out loud here for a moment. One thing is domain knowledge, right? You never hire a data scientist off the street who has 10 years of specific industry expertise or whatever. They may have 5, 10 years of data science experience.
Yep.
But I think that knowledge, the ones who are really good data scientists typically are also really good at learning fast, right? And figuring out where did you just drop me into, and how do I collaborate and communicate effectively with business partners to understand what the problem is, so that they can add value beyond just do, right? So if I have to tell people just do, then, they're not bringing themselves to the table. So that's a challenge. When we get top talent, we always get people who can, rise to the occasion, figure out the business, if you will, who are good communicators. And but almost in every hire, I'm thinking, one of the first things I'm thinking is how long to productivity, right? If I hire this person, are they productive on day 1, 6 months in, 9 months? Is it a year and a half before I really get to fully utilize this person?
Yep.
And I don't know a solution to that. I don't think it's do you take someone who already has industry knowledge and turn them into a data scientist, or you take a data scientist, and I generally say take the data scientist who can really think in the models and the tools and the whatnot, and then go, okay, now when you collaborate, every project you're going to learn more than you knew on the last project. It will evolve. But we shouldn't think that we're just letting people loose in the organization to go figure out what the problems are and solve them, right? They should always be collaborative, right? So whether we're working with underwriters, actuaries, or claims professionals, right? We're always looking for them to help us with the domain knowledge. help us understand what your problem is and make sure that we are delivering something that is of value. Talent is certainly a challenge, but surprisingly, that's different at different points in my career. Sometimes it's easier to find the right folks, and I don't know if it's because I've been in different geographies or different companies or just the time, right? I have now successfully hired someone during a pandemic, and it's pretty challenging when you still have to go through the whole business, but everything is remote. I have hired people where within a few resumes we found the right person. I have hired people where we've gone through 500 resumes before we get to the right person, and that's what I mean is that sort of just changes with time.
Yep.
I don't know if there's a pattern to that yet or not, but it's definitely a challenge.
Okay. Great. So we have a lot of listeners that are aspiring data scientists, right? That they want to either get into the field, either second career, or they're in university, or they're getting their master's. So, what do you say to someone who wants to enter into data science, not only in terms of what should they be studying or what are the skills, but also from your perspective, kind of, you've talked a lot about collaboration and communication, leadership skills. So, what are a few things you would say to someone looking to get into data science?
Communication is a critical skill that is often overlooked. And I would tell that to the most senior people that I work with, as well as junior folks, right? Be an effective listener. Learn to listen, learn to pick up on cues and learn to ask the right questions. Embrace learning. You learn a lot in graduate school or your bachelor's program, wherever you're developing those skills, but you should be a continuous learner. And what I mean by that is, even if you knew everything about predictive modeling, first off, give it time and something's going to change even in that world, right? The techniques that we have are vastly evolving.
Yep.
But second is be curious and be prepared to learn wherever you get dropped in, right? I think about like parachuting someone into somewhere, and it's like, okay, now you've got to figure out where you're at and what do the people do? How does the company make money? Where are there efficiencies to be gained? Where their personality conflicts across the organization, things like that. Just being curious to say, how do we help people from one group to another? How do we build models that don't create conflict, but rather resolve business problems? Of course, learn the, regression analysis and, what's the difference between moderation and mediation, and how do I use my coding skills to its fullest effect, and all of the technical skills. Of course, you need to learn all of those things. But I think what sets someone apart is not only having those skills. There's generally, with any organization, there's going to be a bar, right? And you'll need to get above that bar on that. But what will really set you apart beyond that is that ability to listen, communicate effectively, convey your thoughts succinctly.
Fantastic. Well, Thomas Fletcher, VP of Analytics, thank you so much for the time. This has been super interesting. I know the audience is going to kind of appreciate your insight, and we just welcome you and appreciate you being a part of the Data Standard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.